The navigation grid begins deleting reference points faster than the crew can memorize them. A guidance line stretches across the display, then ends in black. The ship turns toward denser regions cataloged years earlier, but every alternate route curves back into the same expanding volume of emptiness. Inside the cabin, nothing is malfunctioning. Air pressure remains stable. Engine output stays constant. The spacecraft is still functioning perfectly. Outside, its usable space is starting to disappear. A single dim galaxy hangs ahead of the spacecraft window like a porch light at the end of an abandoned road. It does not grow larger. The stars behind it keep thinning instead. At first, the emptiness feels temporary, a gap between clusters the ship will cross before the normal sky returns. But the farther the camera moves into the Boötes Void, the less structure remains visible in any direction. The sky does not fill back in. NASA maps describe this region as stretching roughly 330 million light-years across, large enough to hold thousands of galaxies. Instead, most of it remains almost empty. Not dark, empty. A navigation display quietly begins removing reference points one by one. The change registers physically before the instruments finish describing it. Distance stops behaving normally. Forward movement no longer feels connected to arrival. The galaxy ahead stays weak and small, while the surrounding universe slowly disappears around it. It starts feeling less like travel and more like drifting after the coastline disappears. Inside the cabin, the life support systems continue their ordinary mechanical rhythm. Fans circulate air, pumps regulate temperature. Nothing sounds wrong. But every survival system on board depends on reachable structures somewhere ahead. And out here, the visible universe keeps becoming thinner. The navigation grid keeps widening its search radius. Every viable route still folds back into the same empty volume. Thin chains of galaxies appear across the display for a few seconds at a time, weak little bridges stretching through black volume. And then the map widens further and the bridges dissolve again into isolation. The empty region keeps surrounding the route. A glowing guidance line reaches forward across the screen and simply disappears. The ship turns 3 degrees starboard, then 12 degrees below the galactic plane, then farther outward toward a denser cluster detected by Hubble years earlier. None of it changes the geometry ahead. Every direction that still leads anywhere useful keeps opening into the same darkness. Inside the Boötes Void, astronomers have identified only around 60 galaxies where thousands should exist. The numbers stop helping once the scale becomes visible. The body starts reacting to confinement without walls. Eyes stay fixed on the same shrinking scatter of distant light for so long that orientation begins slipping loose from movement itself. The engines continue pushing forward, but psychologically, the craft already feels stranded. Even turning away changes nothing. The isolation field moves with the route now. Outside the window, one narrow ribbon of galaxies stretches weakly across the void, like a fading crack in sea ice. It holds for a moment. Then the surrounding darkness swallows the shape again, while the ship continues drifting through it. Far outside the ship, the darkness finally begins showing shape. Not stars, boundaries. Dense walls of galaxies curve around the void in enormous glowing bands. Faint rivers of clustered light outlining something too large for normal spatial instinct to hold together at once. The empty center no longer looks random. It looks excavated. The galaxies gathered somewhere else. Astronomers first noticed it while mapping large-scale cosmic structure. A volume this large should contain thousands of Milky Way-sized systems. Instead, gravity slowly pulled matter outward toward denser regions over billions of years, leaving the interior underfilled like water draining from a basin. For a moment, the environment almost feels understandable. A thin, luminous thread crosses the dark center ahead of the ship, one of the sparse internal galaxy chains still remaining inside the void. Navigation systems immediately lock onto it as a stable reference corridor. Then the timing estimates appear. Even at impossible velocity, the nearest usable galaxy remains separated by distances longer than civilizations survive intact. The route exists physically, but not operationally. Human planning stops functioning at this scale. Clocks, fuel projections, recovery windows, return trajectories, all of them begin stretching into abstractions. Outside the window, the surrounding cosmic walls continue glowing quietly around the darkness, while the ship moves deeper between them. The navigation lock stays fixed on the thin galaxy chain ahead. Then one of the galaxies fades from the alignment model entirely. Not because it vanished, because the ship moved far enough for the surrounding scale to change again. What looked connected from a distance now separates into isolated points scattered across impossible depth. The corridor was never really a corridor. A landmark can still be unreachable. One galaxy sharpened slowly through the forward glass, bright enough to show shape at last. A pale rotating disk suspended alone inside blackness. The crew finally has something stable to look at. But the distance estimate barely changes. The center of the Boötes Void lies roughly 700 million light-years from Earth. Even visible objects here behave less like destinations and more like stains left on the edge of perception. The eye can hold them. Human systems cannot reach them in any meaningful sense. Inside the cabin, nothing physically fails. Air pressure remains stable. Temperature remains controlled. The body survives comfortably while external orientation collapses beyond recovery. The navigation model keeps updating anyway. Arrival predictions recalculate. Communication windows stretch outward. Eventually, even tiny timing errors become large enough to break long-range coordination. Understanding the environment no longer improves movement through it. The map explains the void, but it cannot make the void usable. Outside, the remaining galaxies continue dimming apart from one another until the darkness between them becomes the dominant visible structure again. The remaining galaxies stay visible for a while longer. Then the camera keeps pulling back. One by one, the isolated lights shrink into dust-sized marks against the dark, until even the galaxy walls surrounding the void begin losing shape. The spacecraft disappears first, then the thin internal galaxy chains. Eventually, the emptiness itself becomes the largest visible structure in frame. The danger is the distance itself. Nothing strikes the hull. No radiation storm tears through the cabin. No impact alarm sounds. Inside, the crew can still breathe normally while the ship continues operating exactly as designed. But distance quietly removes every system survival depends on at once. Rescue becomes meaningless first, then recovery, then communication return times, then navigation certainty. The environment does not destroy the spacecraft physically. It outlasts every practical timeline attached to human movement. Astronomers still consider the Boötes Void one of the largest known cosmic voids ever observed. If the Milky Way existed near its center, many neighboring galaxies familiar to Earth astronomy would disappear beyond ordinary detection entirely. The night sky itself would thin into absence, and the emptiness would continue behaving normally. Far out inside the black volume, a few isolated galaxies remain suspended like distant embers, while the surrounding darkness keeps expanding between them long after observation stops.